This is my robot, Jeremy. He enjoys checking groceries, repetitive motion, and small talk.
Did you see the game last night?
In this clip, Jeremy is working autonomously using a policy called ACT that I trained using LeRobot framework. This is my second video in a series on the SO arm robot. This video is for you if you have assembled your LeRobot SO100 or SO101 and now you want to train it to do something fun. We'll focus on the ACT policy, action chunking with transformers, which is the best policy to get started with. I'll be mainly talking about practical aspects of using ACT, what the policy is good at, what types of things it can do, and what are its limitations and what it cannot do. A decent modern computer will run inference for ACT at acceptable speeds, but a GPU is needed to train the model in a reasonable time. I don't have a GPU, so I use Google Colab to train models in the cloud. For the ACT policy, it takes about 2 hours and costs roughly $2 in compute credits, and I'll talk more about how to set that up later on. At this point, I'm assuming you have successfully assembled the SO arm robot and teleoperator, have run calibration, and can teleoperate the robot with cameras installed and showing video feeds on your computer. If you haven't reached this point, I would recommend going back to the first video in the series where I share some tips to avoid pitfalls in setting up the robot. First, let's talk about inference speed. How fast your computer can run a trained policy to decide how the robot should move. Of course, this depends on your computer. I'm using a mini PC that I bought online last year for about $300. It has a 4-core Intel processor that usually runs at 1.3 GHz, though the marketing material says it can throttle up to 3.6 GHz at max turbo frequency, which sounds pretty cool. As you can see, this computer is decent, but certainly not very powerful. The cool thing is that it can run the ACT policy fairly well. Now, you may have noticed that Jeremy pauses about every second and a half. That pause is showing us how long inference takes, a little under a second in my case. When an action chunk has finished executing, the current robot position and current camera images are being run through the ACT policy to generate the next chunk of robot actions. If you have a similar or better processor, it should work fine for you. Ahead of time, I wasn't sure how long inference would take on my hardware for this 80 million parameter model, so I was happy that it does complete in a reasonable amount of time. It would be kind of a bummer if it took much longer, which would be the case if you were using a more sophisticated policy with a larger footprint. For example, the Pi 0 or Pi 0.5 models from Physical Intelligence have over 3 billion parameters, which is about 40 times larger, so I'd say that's impractical to run on a PC like this. Now, you do still need a GPU to train, even the ACT model, and we'll get to that at the end of this video. But for now, let's talk about what types of tasks the policy can learn. In order to understand this, we need to know just a little bit about how the model works. First, what does the model take in? When it is time to run inference, it takes a snapshot of the current state. That means the robot's pose, which is just a list of the 6 joint angles, and a picture from each camera at this moment. Those are the model's inputs. What does the model give us back? It gives a chunk of actions. The default length of this chunk is 50. This means that right after we run policy inference, we have 50 actions ready to go, and we're going to step through those 50 actions one at a time, 30 times per second, kind of blindly because we're disregarding anything that the cameras see during this time. It's not until all of those actions are used up that we'll consider the robot's pose, look at the cameras, and start this process all over again. A quick note. If you look at the LeRobot record script, it looks like inference is run on the policy every time through the record loop. But what is happening here is that the policy itself is doing this batching. So in the record loop, we ask the policy for a single action, and if there are any actions left over from the last time it ran inference, the policy gives us one. Otherwise, it runs inference, stores the new chunk of actions, and deals us just one off the top of that new deck. Now, understanding this process gives an idea of what types of things the policy can handle, at least in theory. If you are sitting in the robot's place with your eyes closed, and now you open your eyes, can you tell me at this moment what needs to happen to complete the task? Say the task is to be a cat. That is, to knock a cup off of the table. Could you do that? Yes, you open your eyes, there's a cup, you take a swipe at it, the cup falls off the table, you go back to sleep. So yes, LeRobot can make your SO101 act like a cat. How about something else? Say drawing a figure 8 pattern in the air. I would say no. Consider what would happen if you're right at the center of the figure 8 when you finish off an action chunk. Inference would be run, and the policy would have no way of knowing if you're moving from left to right or the other way. So the robot could wind up choosing to do either. Can you check groceries? Yes. If there's something in your gripper, you should move towards the bag to drop it off. If there's nothing in your gripper, you either go to the conveyor to pick up the next item or go to rest if there's nothing on the conveyor. You can see that Jeremy does return to rest if there's nothing on the conveyor, which I did demonstrate a little bit in the training. He does jump up and peek at the conveyor from time to time, which I think is because the main action from the starting position was to move toward the conveyor in the training examples. But if I included more training for him to sit still when the belt is empty, I think he could do that more reliably, especially because I have a camera view that can always see the conveyor. Think about these last two examples. Do you think ACT could be trained to play checkers or ping pong? When it comes to recording demonstrations, there are some guidelines to help you wind up with a good robot policy. ACT is specifically designed to work well from a small number of demonstrations. This means that a bad demonstration can influence your policy a lot, so it's recommended to curate your training dataset carefully. Remember that teleoperated demonstrations are taken as gospel. They're considered by the training process to be the correct way of operating in a given situation, and the robot will imitate them. Don't drop the block. LeRobot does have tools to remove certain episodes from datasets, to splice datasets together, etc. You can also abort a training episode if something goes off the rails. Hitting the back arrow starts an episode over. Now, this wasn't actually working for me in Ubuntu, and I think that's because the Pi input module doesn't work with Wayland. But I was able to get it working by installing Xterm, which is a terminal emulator, and opening an Xterm window to launch the LeRobot record script. This function is highly convenient to have, and I was very happy to find this workaround. Next, I want to talk about variation in your demonstrations. ACT is a simple policy, and in general, it doesn't generalize well. It's okay for things to vary, like the position of the block you're picking up, but for your robot to succeed at performing the task autonomously, that variability has to be represented in your training data. If you only teach it to pick up a block in front of the robot, it probably won't figure out how to pick up a block that is located off to the side. Fix your camera positions. If your camera is in one position while recording demonstrations but moves before inference, you will not have a very good time. A symptom of this is the robot missing the block it's attempting to pick up. Sherry X. Chen on Hugging Face covered this nicely in their blog article on ACT policy training. Note that it is possible that you can intentionally move your camera around between demonstrations so that the policy will become robust to these types of changes, but if you take this approach, be prepared to record a lot more examples. A quick aside, it has been noted that a robot might not know how to recover from a bad situation if it hasn't seen anything like it in its training. The pick-and-place bowl tipping over, for example. It can be tricky to reconcile this with the mandate to only include good demonstrations, but if you find that your robot frequently winds up in a bad situation and can't recover, try starting a few demonstration episodes from that bad place. This way it can learn what to do to remedy the situation without learning, by example, the behavior that would cause the problem. I originally wanted to use 3 cameras, but my little machine can't keep up with that many camera streams. Luckily, I get good performance with just 2 cameras. I think it's fairly intuitive that you want your cameras to get good coverage of the robot's workspace. Ronan from Trellis Research gives a good overview of this in his video on ACT policy training, and he makes the good point that you don't want your camera views to include the teleoperator area. This would cause the policy to cue off your teleoperation movements, but of course you won't be there during autonomous operation. The wisdom from LeRobot here is that your cameras should provide enough information for you to be able to perform the task. Now, I have seen this interpreted as while recording demonstrations, look only at the camera feeds, but I disagree with this. I think when placing the cameras, you should consider how well the views capture and represent the task, but once you've picked your camera locations, I would pull out all the stops when recording demonstrations in order to get the highest quality training data possible. This is one part I was worried about potentially becoming a stumbling block back when I ordered the SO arm earlier this year. Luckily, it turned out to be pretty easy to get training up and running in Google Colab, and it doesn't cost too much to train an ACT policy either. When you record a LeRobot dataset, in this case teleoperating demonstration episodes, the default is for the dataset to be pushed to the Hugging Face hub. I thought this was a little weird at first, but it turns out it's actually really convenient because when you go over to Google Colab to train the policy, Google Colab can grab that dataset right off the hub and you don't have to bother uploading the dataset to the Colab environment. Let's go over to my Colab notebook to check it out. All right, so here's our Colab notebook. Up here at the top right is where you select what hardware you want to connect to. To train the ACT policy on a CPU takes between 2 weeks and 2 months, so yeah, I recommend using a GPU. The A100 works really well, usually takes a little over 2 hours for the default 100,000 training steps and costs about 50 cents per hour. The G4 is a little more powerful but also more expensive. The H100 is a monster, but I've never actually gotten Colab to allocate one to me. Sometimes you do want to use the CPU instance, mainly for getting the notebook set up and tested without having to pay for that development time. Okay, now up here is where we're installing the library. With a cloud instance, we have to do this every time, but using UV, it actually happens really fast. I like to stay consistent and use the same LeRobot library version as I use locally. In this version, 0.4.4, there's a version mismatch that would cause an error during training, so I have to upgrade the Hugging Face Hub library here. But I know this has been fixed in LeRobot 0.5, so you don't have to worry about it anymore. Then I have some sanity checks here just to make sure everything looks good. If you're on a GPU instance, you should see that torch.cuda.isAvailable returns true, so that we'll be able to use the GPU. Here I'm setting environment variables for API keys for Hugging Face and weights and biases. It's convenient to store your keys in the notebook's secrets, which is this little key icon on the left of the screen. Logging into Hugging Face will let us upload our train policy to the hub at the end of this run. That happens automatically when training is finished. And logging into weights and biases will let us see progress on the run as it's happening, which is really nice to have, and I recommend signing up for that. If you had started the run before and it crashed for some reason, you may have to delete this output/train directory before restarting, otherwise it will just crash again. LeRobot is scared to overwrite an existing policy. And here's the main event, the LeRobot train call. This should look familiar from the library. This starts training, and once training is done, your new policy will be uploaded to the hub. Make sure you have the device set to GPU here. Once you start this, you'll see the link to monitor it on weights and biases right here. The dataset will get downloaded, and once you start to see stuff like this, you're pretty much in the clear. You can see I stopped this run manually. Now, if you pay for Google Colab Pro, you can close the window and go about your day. I don't have Pro, I buy compute units directly, so I kind of have to babysit the Colab window. If you leave it alone too long or the computer goes to sleep, the remote instance will shut down and the run will die, which I did learn the hard way. I hope this video was helpful for you. The next couple videos in the series explore customizations to the SO arm robot and teleoperator and getting a little deeper into the LeRobot library. Eventually I'll be showing you how to build a simple robot from scratch and integrating it with the LeRobot ecosystem. Happy repetitive motions. See you next time.